And tonight we're going to talk about, you know, GMRS for hams and how, if you could take away anything from the presentation tonight, it would be about, the role that you might be able to play in terms of counseling with new people. They're interested in radio. Maybe they come across and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about getting into GMRS." You'll be able to offer them some insights as to the kinds of things that would cause that to be a really good decision for them. And then, depending on what they want to accomplish, some of the things that you might want to influence them toward a little bit of a investment in time to take that technician class as a ham instead of GMRS. And so that's kind of the purpose of what we're going to try to do today. And so let me share my screen here. And it looks like it's working. So we'll do that. So we're just going to call it a ham's guide to GMRS and work through some of the basics, rules and so forth, and how you might be able to use this information when you speak to others. Now I need to get my screen to advance. There we go. It looks like I have to reach up and touch it. So we can do that. So by way of an overview, we're going to talk a little bit about the general personal radio services, and they're in Part 95 of Title 47, whereas we know our ham rules are in Part 97. And then we're also then going to talk a little bit about what the GMRS privileges are, really explosive growth in GMRS over the last 2 or 3 years. We'll dig a little deeper. We'll talk about range and radios and repeaters that you find in the GMRS world. Some misconceptions, and this I think will be an area where you can offer some insight into questioners about what they expect and what they can expect in return from using GMRS. And then what are some of those common uses that are available to us as GMRS operators. So by way of introduction, my name's Jim Mohan. My amateur call sign is Alpha Alpha 7 Juliet Mike. My GMRS call sign is WRKZ 231, and that format is standard for all GMRS licenses, 4 letters and 3 numbers. I've got a YouTube channel called Gadget Talk, where I do radio reviews and how-tos, primarily with GMRS and ham radios, but occasionally some other electronic gizmo will find its way onto my channel. And so I'd appreciate it if you took a look sometime. And then I think the thing that called your attention to me was the New Operator's Guide to GMRS, which is a book I wrote a little less than 2 years ago, maybe, when I saw the expansion of GMRS, and I started seeing people asking questions in online groups and Facebook groups and what have you, and they got a lot of bogus responses from people. So in many cases at that time, there was a lot of the blind leading the blind. So I thought, well, some of those guys might like something on paper or in their Kindle that they could reference and get some of the basics out of the way so that they could make a good decision in terms of what it is they wanted to do in with their new potential GMRS license. So the personal radio services are Part 95, and it describes a bunch of services, and the ones I've got listed here are just the kind of the basics that we're all familiar with. Citizen band or CB MRS, which is the multi-use radio service. RC is in Part 95 as well, and those are the toy store radio control models, cars and boats and that kind of stuff. Then there's the family radio service, or FRS, and then where we're going to spend most of our time tonight is with the GMRS, the General Mobile Radio Service. A couple of keywords there. One is general, which means broad, and then the other is mobile, which means, on the go. And so keeping those two descriptors in mind helps us to understand what's going on in GMRS. So a CB, they're fixed and mobile two-way comms. You can have handy talkies with embedded or attached antennas, but you don't have to. You can remember the big 102-inch whips in the back of cars, maybe when you were growing up. The modes available in CB have been AM and SSB for a long time, but just recently they added FM to the CB radio. So newer CB radios are going to have an FM mode. They're low power, as with the rest of the personal radio services. And they differ, CB differs from the rest of them because it's in the HF band. It's down at 11 meters. FRS, on the other hand, is also two-way communications. Those little blister pack radios have to have an attached antenna. They're low power. Unlike GMRS, these are configured for narrow FM, and the frequency ranges are shared with GMRS, but they're up in the 462 to 467 megahertz, just above the 70 centimeter amateur band. Excuse me. MRS is kind of an interesting service. That's a little MRS radio that I have there. And if you have a couple of people you want to talk to regularly and they're close by, and you don't want to be bothered by anybody else, MRS is probably the right service because nobody uses it. It's just not a lot of activity there. And when you look at the relatively low range and low power, the chances of you bumping into somebody on one of the 5 MRS channels is really pretty low. But it can do AM and FM. It also can be used to send data, and they're down there at about 151 megahertz. In one of the FCC reorganizations of the things in this part, MRS came over from being a commercial area to being in the personal radio service. So, they've got 5 channels. I think they're like 1, 2, 3, red dot and green dot. And those are just carryovers from when this was frequency that used to be for commercial use. Where we're going to spend most of our time is in GMRS. And so again, you can use GMRS radios as fixed. The little picture there is a Oshan KG1000 Plus that I have in my shack. I have it connected to Ed Fong radio antenna. That's my fixed station. I can have detachable antennas. They have both low and medium power levels, and we'll look at that in just a second. These, instead of narrowband FM as with FRS, GMRS radios, except for a couple of channels right in the middle of the channel listing, are all wide FM. And just recently, they added the ability to transmit data. So you can transmit, like GPS is real popular. If you have, unfortunately, they're kind of brand specific, but if you've got a couple of people who are out in the woods or hiking or around town, whatever, if they've got the same brand of stuff and they've got the radios configured the same way, they can send location data back and forth to each other. And again, it runs in the same frequency band as FRS does. So the things that are, common in all of these, CB, FRS, and MRS, are licensed by device. And what that means is the licensing occurs, but it's between the manufacturer and the FCC. The user is not involved in licensing. So if you buy a radio that's certified for CB, FRS, or MRS, you're licensed because the device is licensed. On the other hand, GMRS is licensed by individual. And so each individual has to purchase a GMRS license. But unlike in ham radio, where we have to, learn the basics and learn the rules and all the rest, this is more like buying a fishing license. You have to identify yourself to the FCC, sign up that you'll follow the rules and pay them their money, and then you're licensed. The radios are channelized because there's no expectation that the user knows anything about radios. They want that's built around people who, want to be able to turn it on, set a channel, squeeze the push to talk, and talk. And so GMRS radios are built in such a way that only the GMRS channels are can be transmitted on. And so as we'll see in some of the advanced radios, while there are a number of frequencies and a number of channels that you can program, the only ones you can transmit on are GMRS channels. Now, just like the other radios, GMRS radios have to be certified by the FCC and get an FCC identification, usually on the back of the radio, between the radio and the battery if it's an HT. And the use of non-certified radios is not allowed. Now, I don't mean to step on anybody's toes here, but what I hear a lot of people, especially hams, who understand how radios work, is say, I want an unlocked radio, and I'm just going to program the GMRS radio frequencies into my radio so I can have both. I've got a GMRS license, I've got a ham license, I've got one device, I'm going to use that. Okay, you do you, but you are, when you use that uncertified radio, you're what the FCC calls an unauthorized user. And so the fact that you have a GMRS license and you're using a ham radio, your GMRS license doesn't matter, because at that point, you're not an authorized user. And one of the interesting things I found out as I read through these rules is that if you know that you're talking to an unauthorized user, even if you have a GMRS certified radio, you become an unauthorized user as well. And so, bureaucrats can be frustrating, but they're not stupid, and they get you coming and going. So the good news is that you can get some really pretty decent, handy-talky GMRS radios for under $30. So I always make a recommendation that you just take it with you as opposed to run on the outside of the of what the rules require. So here are some specific things about GMRS. They have both HTs and mobile or base stations. I showed you my radio a few seconds ago. I use it as a base. It could easily be mounted in a car. They've got both simplex and repeater channels. So channels 1 through 7 are limited to 5 watts, but channels 15 to 22 are limited to 50 watts, and then 23 to 30 are also 50 watts. So part of that individual license thing is that you're given radios with a lot more power. And then the channels from 8 to 14 are only half a watt. And they call those the interstitial channels. They're in between. And if you were to look at a channel listing of GMRS channels by frequency, you would see that those particular channels are up in the 467 range, and they've got them squeezed in between other channels, which is why they're narrow band. So they're 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth instead of 25. And so with the low power, the low range, and then the narrow band, they're able to squeeze those in to provide more channels for GMRS users by making the most effective use of the bandwidth that is assigned to GMRS. Now, one of the things that I mentioned was new is data on HTs, and we're sometimes, since this is fairly new, and the HTs with data are fairly new to the market, we find that a lot of guys are caught kind of flat-footed. Is they say, oh, I'd like to be able to transmit GPS data, or I'd like to be able to transmit some other data. But what they failed to note in the rules is that a data-capable HT has to have a permanently affixed antenna. So if they were planning to use a mag mount antenna and just put an adapter onto the antenna and use an HT in their car, that's fine, except if the HT can deal with data, in which case the antenna is not supposed to come off. So I've seen them connected with just set screws that you could probably, warm up a little bit and break the Loctite and pull them off. And then I've seen others that are on there with a lot more strength. And so you run the risk of breaking the radio if you try to force the antenna off. Another thing that a lot of GMRS users don't realize is that GMRS, and this is the general part of general mobile radio service, is that you can use it for business. It's not unusual in a Facebook group or other online forum to see someone complaining about how they drove by the local Walmart and they could hear, clean up on aisle 5 kind of things. And they were all hot and bothered about Walmart using a GMRS channel. Well, that's allowed. Now, most big businesses are going to use commercial systems, but using GMRS for business or personal use are both allowed. And so a lot of times you'll see that, a family business might use that. I think I refer to that here in another slide or two, so I'm not going to go into that too deeply, but family business would be a great use for GMRS. The other thing is that license is really broad, So if I got a license and I have it, when I go camping, I can give a GMRS radio to my wife. I can give it to my kids. I can give it to my grandkids. I could give it to, Aunt Sally or Uncle Duke if they're out camping with us, and they're all under the same license. So the FCC made a really broad definition of what close family is. And so that makes these kind of radios really useful. For example, if you were out on the farm or something like that, everybody could use it. One person has a license, and that makes it a pretty effective tool in that regard. And then the other thing is that GMRS allows the use of repeaters, which of course FRS doesn't do, and I'm pretty sure CB doesn't do it either. So repeater use opens up the range a lot for GMRS operators. There's some restrictions, and most of these are the same that we deal with in ham radio all the time as well. And that is you can't use the radio to do something illegal. So if you were using the radio to tip off your buddy who's down trying to rob a store, now you become an unauthorized user because you're using it for an illegal purpose. You can't broadcast ads. You can't use obscene language, and there's an ID requirement that's very similar to what we do as hams as well. Now, the one I skipped over was intentional interference, and the reason I did that is I want to expand on that just a little. A lot of people in the GMRS world will come back and say, well, the FCC doesn't care. Nobody's going to do anything, do whatever they want, that kind of cowboy attitude. But in this area, unintentional interference is going to catch somebody's attention, probably another GMRS user who reports you. If you look at some of the recent FCC enforcement actions that have resulted in some pretty significant fines, they've always included intentional interference. And so intentional interference is one of those things that's going to draw the FCC's attention to a bad operator. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's been this big growth in GMRS, and I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One of them, I think, was the pandemic lockdowns. People wanted a hobby, people wanted to be able to do something, and so this was a relatively inexpensive thing to do. If somebody in the family had gotten sick, you'd give them a radio, let them live at the basement, and if they wanted dinner brought down, they could radio you, and you wouldn't have to come in contact with them. We've also seen kind of a growth in this prepper mentality, whether it's off-grid prepping or whether it's urban prepping. We certainly saw some serious damage with tornadoes in Iowa a week or so ago, hurricanes on the coast. Some of the GMRS radios have got some really good tools embedded in them that allow them to be a really good emergency communication device, if nothing else, in the frequency bands that they can receive, let alone, those 30 channels where they can transmit. I think another reason for the growth was the thing that stung us as hams when our licenses went from $0 to $35. The GMRS guys won that one because their license had been $70 and it dropped to $35. So that made licenses much more affordable. And then there's just been a boatload of cheap but fairly capable radios, mostly from Chinese manufacturers that have hit the market. In fact, a lot of those radios are ham radios with different firmware. So it does all the same things that many of the radios that you may have in your camping bag or on the shelf like I do behind me here. It'll do the same things, except it'll only transmit on GMRS channels. So just a couple of the numbers associated with that. Excuse me. There were about 64,000 new GMRS operators in 2022. All this assumes that I used the search function on the FCC database correctly, but another almost 64,000 in 2023. And so far in 2024, there's been approximately 30,000. So that means 2024 has the potential to double the total number of new GMRS operators out there. So for those last 3 or 2.25, 2 years and 1 quarter, that's 158,000 new operators for a grand total of 272,000 active GMRS licenses recorded in the database. Now, again, since that includes family, there's probably more users than that, but I suspect that for a lot of them, it's the man of the house that's the radio enthusiast. And while they may occasionally have the kids or the wife or something involved, that number is certainly bigger in terms of users than 272,000, but maybe not a lot bigger. I have no data. It's just kind of my sense of that. And then compare that down below the chart where those numbers are mapped out. You see that the ham licenses as of the end of this first quarter 2024 are over 755,000. So there's a whole boatload more hams out there than there are GMRS operators. And that we're going to see as we work through the presentation is going to be important in terms of setting expectations with potential new GMRS users. Before we go there, though, I want to spend just a little bit time talking about range and repeaters. So let's talk about range first. And this is all old hat to you. You know this. But one of the things I discovered when I was writing the book that I just thought was cool. So if you'd allow me a little bit of a rabbit chase here, but we know that geography makes a huge difference. Antennas make a huge difference. Power maybe less so than the other two. But a GMRS radio in the Great Plains or on a lake shore is going to be a much longer range than in downtown. I know when I'm in downtown Phoenix, my range simplex, whether it's ham or GMRS, just isn't very good if I'm not hitting a repeater on top of one of the big bank buildings downtown. Same thing when I go camping, when I'm in a deep forest, the range plummets, and that we know that it happens. The new GMRS operator may not know that. So here's the rabbit I want to chase for just a minute. I came across this, and it was computing line of sight, or actually computing the distance to the horizon, which essentially is the key component to line of sight. And so the distance to the horizon is 1.22459, which represents the curvature of the Earth. If it was Mars, that would be a different number, times the square root of the height of the antenna above the ground. And so again, in North Dakota or sitting on the lake shore of Lake Superior, you've got a clear run. And so this formula would probably be very close, whereas just about anywhere else, it's just kind of something to keep in the back of your mind as to why something may or may not be happening. So in example 1, if we've got 2 people who are each 5'10", hold their antenna or their radio in front of their face at about 5.6 feet above the ground, you run through the arithmetic and you end up with each of them having about 2.9 miles to the horizon. You add that together. And so line of sight between those 2 guys would be about just under 6 miles. You throw one of them on top of a repeater on a 60-foot tower and things change a lot. And so the arithmetic is there on the screen, but it's 2.9 miles for the guy standing, about 9.4 miles for the radio on the tower, which gives you, a line of sight of about 12.3 miles, which is, significant. Again, the height of either of those antennas is going to make a big difference. I know one of the things that I get a kick out of is there are a couple of notable GMRS YouTubers out there, and one of them often talks about the fact that he can hit a repeater 60 miles away. And I have no reason to doubt him, but knowing generally where he lives and where the repeater is, he's on a mountain on one side of the Los Angeles Valley. The repeater's on a mountain on the other side of the Los Angeles Valley. And so 60 miles is absolutely achievable. I mean, we know with a handheld Yagi, we can bounce a signal off a repeater on a satellite. So with a 5-watt radio. So we know that that's not out of the question at all. But for the new operator, they're thinking, oh boy, I can go 60 miles. And so they get this radio and he goes home and he's living in the hills of the beautiful Smoky Mountains, and he's unhappy because he can't reach his wife when she goes down to the store that's a half mile away. He just doesn't understand some of the dynamics of what's happening with radio frequencies here in that 70 centimeter area. And so just in terms of a drawing, here's that 6 mile, two guys talking, and the impact of having a tower that allows that distance to go up quite a bit. And that distance could go up considerably more if the guy on the left-hand side of the was standing on a hill or was in the second floor of his house, that kind of thing. And so the line of sight is one of the things that trips new people up quite often. And then, of course, the range killers are rocks, mountains, trees, and then I've already mentioned the lousy reception you get simplex in a big city. So the radios themselves, I've divided up into a couple of different categories. One of them is basic and the other is advanced. And so on the left-hand side of this slide, the second one in is a basic GMRS. Notice it doesn't have a keypad, it doesn't have a screen or anything like that. The top button, you just turn it to one of the channels you want and talk. If you want CTCSS or DCS codes, that has to be programmed with a CPS, customer programming software. And these are great if you're going to be handing them out in that family business, or if you're going to clip them to the shirt of the guy who's out plowing the field and somebody wants to call him back in because someone's come to talk to him, that kind of thing. And then the one on the far left is a Radioddity brand GM30, very popular GMRS radio, but it's an advanced radio, and it is very similar to the budget class radios in the ham world. It's got like 1,000 channels. It's dual band, picks up FM. It'll pick up NOAA channels. All those programmable channels, you can program in things like the railroad frequencies, the marine frequencies. If there's somebody in your neighborhood that uses plain FM in the emergency services or public services arena, you'll be able to pick those up as well. And the interesting thing is the two radios that are there in that picture cost about the same. And so really that basic radio is for the primary user who doesn't want somebody messing with their radio and changing settings that basically put them in communicado because they've made some change that keeps the radio from receiving the channel that they want them to be using. Excuse me. The other one is the difference between budget and more expensive radios. And on the right side are a couple of Oshan branded radios. The one toward the center is an S88. It's a single band, so UHF only radio. It comes in at, about $150. The KG 935G on the right side is very similar to a ham radio that I have from Oshan, except again, it's GMRS programmed, and it's depending on whether you find it on sale anywhere from $169 to $189. So they go up in price a little bit, but it's rare that you're going to find them crossing the $200 mark. Oshan has a radio that crosses the $200 mark, very similar in appearance to the one on the slide, but that's about the only one I can think of. So the radios are really fairly reasonable in terms of price. The other area you can deal with is mobile radios, and the one on the right is the full base. It's an Ocean 1000G Plus, and it's a 50-watt radio. It's got dual bands. It'll do dual receive, and it's a great little base radio. Like I said, I have this one in my shack connected to an Edfong J-pole. The one on the left side is a mini mobile. And so this one only outputs about 20 watts. But what's really neat about this is that it's really small and its power output is such that even when it's transmitting, it's well within the fused limit of an accessory socket in your car. So you don't have to run wires through the firewall and get directly to the battery and all that stuff. You can just plug it into a socket and it works just fine. So those mobiles are out there as well. And again, that DB20G, I think I have one similar with the proper keystrokes. You can reset it to a ham radio. Now, it won't do both at the same time. It's one or the other, but you can have one chassis that you can configure as one or the other, which is kind of cool. So these advanced GMRS radios have some basic things, normally 40 to 50 not memories, but menu items. They can cover both VHF and UHF in most cases, up to 1,000 receive-only channels in those bands. The NOAA weather channels can be accessed as well as broadcast FM, and has become popular in the last, 18 months, the addition of airband coverages to a lot of these radios. Now, truth be told, these radios' ability to demodulate an AM signal isn't very good, but it's readable. You can hear it if you're close enough to the airport. You can hear the ground, and if you're near a busy airport like I am here in Phoenix, you can hear the airplanes, and they come in a lot cleaner because their altitude and the line of sight to me standing out on my patio. The other thing these things allow you to do is to program what they call do-it-yourself channels. And this started with just a couple of extra channels at the bottom, usually from like 31 to 50 or something. Now the firmware is such that they'll allow you to put these do-it-yourself channels into any of the channels. And what that does, it allows you to put in a GMRS channel and give it a name and then give it a CTCSS code. So if when you want to go camping, you've got the family camping channel, you could put that information in with the channel, the power, bandwidth, and all of those things, plus a name, and you could assign it to channel 70. And everybody, when they went camping, would set their radio to channel 70, and you wouldn't have to go into the menus into those basic 30 GMRS channels to make alterations. Same thing as we'll talk about here in a minute with repeaters. A lot of people in repeater dense areas, because there's only 8 channels for repeaters, end up with several repeaters that they could access from the same place, which would mean that having a channel for repeater A with one CTCSS code versus channel repeater B with a different CTCSS code allows you to change between them by just typing in a new channel number, which is really pretty handy. And as I've said, they're ham radios for all intents and purposes, except the GMRS firmware doesn't allow for transmitting on other than GMRS channels. And then again, with these radios in the advanced category, they're really popular with preppers in that you got the NOAA, you can get broadcast FM, you can dial in other frequencies that may be important in your area. And so it is really a very good comprehensive communications device, plus then the ability to transmit on the GMRS channels. So let's take just a minute or two and talk about repeaters. I've kind of led into that a little bit already, but as I've said, there's only 8 GMRS repeater channels, and the CTCS or DCS codes are built into those repeaters, or their owners select the codes, and they do that so that an individual won't trigger 2 or 3 repeaters at the same time. So if there are several repeaters that are close by, the operator could hit any of them by using the CTCSS codes. He's only going to trigger the one that he's got selected and has the matching CTCSS code. Now, the problem with this, especially in repeater dense areas or GMRS dense areas, is that unlike with hams, there's no regional frequency coordinators. And so if I've got the money, I know nothing about radios, and I want to put up a repeater, I can do it. And so cooperation and goodwill for channel selection is important. And depending on how dense the repeater area is, think the LA area, that can lead to some conflict because when the repeater outputs, it outputs on one of those 15 to 22 simplex channels. And if you've got two repeaters on the same channel, they can cover each other up. And they wouldn't know it because they hadn't been triggered by the CTCSS code, but its transmission will go out on that simplex channel, and they could be burying each other. So there's been more than a couple of instances where people have gotten upset with somebody who throws up a repeater in a repeater-rich area that causes a lot of, consternation. The specified repeater channels are channels 23 to 30, and sometimes you'll see them as 15R to 23R or 22R, and that represents the repeater. And so the radio automatically, when you tune it to that channel, will transmit with a positive 5 megahertz offset. Again, the expectation is that the operator doesn't know anything about radios. He just wants to turn it on and talk. And so there's no requirement to set an offset or to put in the transmitter frequency or anything like that. You just set the repeater channel, 5 megahertz offset is applied. And even with the CTCSS, you're going to be able to, or I'm sorry, even with the customer programming software, you're going to be able to set only a matching channel in that 467 range for the transmitter part of the frequency. So those things are unique about repeaters. But there's another thing that's a couple of things that are unique about repeaters, and that is, just like with ham radio recently, there's been a lot of linking services among GMRS repeaters as well. I was reading a post somebody had on one of the groups the other day, and he said, "Hey, I'm in Texas, and I just talked to a guy in Colorado. I had no idea my little HT could talk all the way to Colorado." Well, of course, it can't. But what did happen was he triggered a repeater that was on the same linking system as the repeater in Colorado, and his call on the repeater got picked up by somebody who was listening to an entirely different repeater connected over the internet 1,000 miles away. And that has become more and more used around the country. The other thing that's different with GMRS repeaters versus ham repeaters is that GMRS repeaters can often be closed or private. And I'll show you that here in just a second with some of the repeaters in the Phoenix area. Repeater clubs generally, if they put up a couple of repeaters, are not going to publish the CTCSS codes. If they find you using it and you're not a member of the club, they're going to try to run you off because they've spent the money to put up the repeater. They're paying the rent. They're paying the electricity, maybe the internet or linking fees and so forth. And so they want to build their club so that they have the cash to keep the repeater running. And basically, they kind of frown on freeloaders. So that is one of the other big differences with GMRS repeaters as opposed to in the ham universe. Now, the equivalent to repeater book in the ham world is mygmrs.com in the GMRS world. And MyGMRS has a website. You register, you'll let you in, give them your GMRS call sign. And their claim to fame is their list of GMRS repeaters. It's a very comprehensive list. But they also have articles on how to get your GMRS license, GMRS linking, and other things. And so if you've not visited there before, I'd recommend doing it because there's a lot of interesting information about the GMRS world, and you can get a sense of what's happening there. But on the left side of this display, I've searched near me, and here are some of the repeaters here in the Phoenix area. And you can see there in that middle column that some of them are listed as members only or paid. And that's the repeater club here in Phoenix. And they've got 4 or 5 repeaters that are connected. So it gives you great coverage all across Phoenix, but they want you to be a member. And it seems reasonable to me. There are also, though, open systems. So, for example, over on the left side, the Shaw Butte 725 is a repeater not far from where I live. And when you click on that little blue link, the display on the right side of the slide comes up and it tells you the status of the repeater, the frequency. It tells you the CTCSS code, whether it's opened or closed, and that kind of stuff, plus a really handy map of the theoretical coverage of that particular repeater, in this case on a little mountain here in the north side of Phoenix called Shaw Butte. So that kind of leads to a root of a problem, and that's this number of repeaters thing. So by searching repeater book for one source for hams and my GMRS as repeaters for GMRS, we saw that, or I found that we've got about 22,000 ham repeaters in the country and about 1,800 GMRS repeaters. In California, which is a big GMRS state, big state overall, 2,600 ham repeaters, but only 160 GMRS repeaters. Here where I live in Arizona, there's 432 repeaters according to Repeater Book, and only 66 GMRS repeaters. And in South Dakota, I picked South Dakota. One, I went to college in South Dakota. I love South Dakota, but it's a big state, but it doesn't have a lot of people. And there are only 76 ham repeaters, but only 2 GMRS repeaters in the entire state of South Dakota. And interestingly enough, the biggest city in South Dakota is Sioux Falls on the eastern border of the state. And neither of those 2 repeaters are in Sioux Falls. The closest one to Sioux Falls is about 30 to 40 miles west of there in a town called Mitchell, home of the famous Corn Palace, if you've ever traveled through that part of South Dakota. And so that gets to one of the main problems that new users have. And I call that the GMRS greatest disappointment. Users expect that they're going to have the same situation as ham radio, but without bothering to take a test. And in most places, that's simply not the case. There are not people just hanging around their radios listening on a channel for someone to talk to. Talking to strangers is generally not, in most parts of the country, the thing that GMRS is used for. GMRS is what I call BYOC, or bring your own contact. You have to have a reason to use GMRS. You have to have people. So maybe you have a neighborhood watch and you use GMRS radios when you go out and drive around your neighborhood, keeping crime down. Or you might use GMRS radios as a public service, much the way hams sometimes do for 5K runs or that kind of thing. But the thumbnail in the right side of this slide is a video I did, about 18, 20 months ago. And I called it Why GMRS Sucks, or doesn't. And the thing is that GMRS sucks if you think it's ham radio without a test. GMRS is a great radio service, on the other hand, if you have a purpose. It's like, the sledgehammer is a great tool for breaking concrete, but it isn't worth a hoot trying to tap in upholstery tacks. And so using the right tool for the right job is important. And the people who have the greatest disappointments when it comes to GMRS is when they have kind of misidentified what it's able to do for them. So what are the uses? Well, car caravans. We're moving across country. Dad's in the U-Haul, mom's got the kids in the car, having a GMRS radio from the front to the back. They're in sight of each other. And so they can just pick up the radio and say, hey, kids need to use this rest stop, or we need to, which of these exits do you want to take for lunch on our trip? I had neighbors when I lived in San Antonio. They love to go on RV caravans. So it'd be like 30 RVers go follow each other around the country and visit various places. Well, GMRS would be great for an RV caravan where you could keep up with one another and talk and not be limited to single one at a time kinds of things that you have with cell phones. You could have kind of this on the road party line if you wanted to. Family contacts while camping. I think I've mentioned those already. I have those radios in my RV. When we pull up to our campsite, I give one to my wife. She goes behind the RV and talks to me on the radio as I back in the RV. And so we don't start the camping screaming at each other, or we often camp with a number of family members in different campsites. And so we can all work under the same license. We all have a radio. So somebody says, hey, the fire's ready. Come on, bring whatever you're bringing for supper. And we can all go meet where we were going to join together for supper. So some great uses for GMRS. That family business. Maybe it's a storage lot, where you rent an extra garage to keep stuff in. So GMRS could work there with a family business or warehouse or a farm, as I think I've mentioned before. Excuse me. So to wrap this up, I'm looking at my time. It's about what I had practiced. So we'll bring this plane in for a landing here. So as I mentioned several times, and I've done it on purpose, and that is GMRS is great for the right purpose. It's short range contact for specific people in a mobile situation. However, in most parts of the country, large group chatting, casual chatting is not there yet. It's evolving. It may get there, but most parts of the country, it's not even close. Also, GMRS is not ham light. So if you're talking with one of your friends or an acquaintance that's thinking about getting a GMRS license, visit with them about what is the purpose? What is it you want to try to achieve? And if their answer is, well, I'd like to be able to talk to people when I'm at home or that kind of thing, that's probably going to be one of those times where you could encourage them to invest a little study time and pick up their technician license so that they have some repeaters that are available with actually people sitting by the radios wanting to talk. And that's probably in most places not going to be the case. You can also point out to them that they're going to have limited range due to the power of the radio and that there are few repeaters. In some cases, those repeaters are a very long way away, as we used in that South Dakota example. And then there's just some basic limits due to where the frequencies are and the limited number of channels as well. So I hope that after having gone through this, you feel like you could have a conversation with that new person and give them some good advice. If the answer is, I'm moving cross country and we want to talk to one another while we drive, the answer is clearly GMRS. If it's, oh, I've been injured, I'm going to have to sit on the couch and I want to talk with somebody, that answer is probably going to be ham radio. And so, do a little investigating and offer up some insights as to what might best meet their needs. So that's kind of what I had for you tonight. And thanks for listening. We've got some time, I think, and so I could entertain questions, or we can just turn it back to Dan and do whatever the rest of this meeting was supposed to be about.
Well, thank you. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate a great presentation. Gene, you got your hand up. You want to go ahead and take it?
Yes, good evening, everybody from glorious Killeen, Texas. Concerning that repeater book, somewhat repeater book, mygmrs.com, does it list like groups of frequencies for like specific areas? Like I live in Bell County here in Texas. I finished up my GMRS radio. I think base it around that, but I'm just wondering if it's only restricted to that area. I don't know if that's confusing or not. Sorry if it is.
No, I think I understand the question, and that is, are there regional frequencies, much like the way regional ham frequency coordinators use that? And the answer is no. There are those 22 GMRS channels. Those are the only ones. They're used all over the country, except I think 19 and 20 probably are not allowed within the A line up by Canada, the same way we have as hams restrictions up there. And then there are 8 repeater channels, and those are the ones. And so if you do an account with mygmrs.com, and part of that, you'll tell it where you are. When you go to the repeaters and click repeaters near me, it'll use geography to point out repeaters that are in your neighborhood, just by where those repeaters are versus a particular frequency. Did I get the right? Did I get what you were trying to ask?
No, that was very helpful. It
Okay.
helped clear up some things and makes me really want to go into that mygmrs.com site a lot more deeper. I've been to it, but
Uh-huh.
casually, but I want to get into it more seriously. But thank you very much. Great
Sure.
presentation.
Carlos, Puerto Rico, Carlos, you want to come on board if I can pronounce it?
Thank you, Jim, and very nice presentation tonight. I have two questions. One is, what about the use of Part 90 commercial radios programmed for GMRS use? There is a lot of controversy on the forums and on some websites regarding this. Some say it's okay, some people say it's not legal. And also, I saw it's also one of the questions in the chat, if it's legal to link GMRS repeaters using the internet. Those are my two questions.
Okay, sure. The second question first, and that is yes, GMRS radios are not allowed to be linked via, POTS, the public, we kind of refer to as the plain old telephone system. That's not legal. But if they have devices now, it's the same ways we link our ham repeaters that interact over the internet, and that kind of linking is done. And as I've looked at that, I'm certainly not an expert on that, but I've seen there are a couple of different groups. One of them is in mygmrs.com, where you can sign up with them to link using their networking software. And I think there's at least one other bunch that allows linking repeaters that way. Now, the second question, you're right. There's a lot of discussion about Part 90 radios, but ultimately in the Part 97E, which is GMRS, it's pretty clear. It says you've got to have a radio that's Part 97 certified. And so if a Part 90 radio might have dual certification, that would be fine. And then I'm not entirely sure what kind of privileges people get with land mobile licenses. I'm just not that familiar with that aspect of licensing. But a lot of times, unfortunately, people say, well, I don't care if the radio does it, I'm going to do it, screw it, But the rules, I think, are pretty clear in terms of GMRS that says it's got to be certified by service. So I think you could have a radio perhaps that had more than one certification, but at least it has to have the certification that you're planning to use it in.
Okay, thank you. I know that for sure there are some Kenwood handhelds with Part 90 and 95 certification, and also the ICOM. It's an old handheld, the ICF21. It has a dual certification.
Yeah.
For Part 95 and Part 90.
Okay.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, that sounds good. Barry, are you in there on what's in chat?
I have been monitoring it. An interesting question about simplex Are simplex repeaters allowed?
I think so. There are simplex repeater devices that, connect to like little Baofeng radios. And I've seen people demonstrate those. But I don't think the repeater needs to have a license as long as the people who are using are identifying and are licensed themselves. But you don't run across simplex repeaters too often. But I think I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't know.
Okay. Great. Other question. Do GMRS manufacturers offer gang chargers for family radios? For example, if you wanted to charge 4 radios at a time in one charger.
Some do. And as I mentioned before, Baofeng comes to mind. And if you've got a Baofeng GMRS radio that's got the same form factor as the gang charger you have, then it's going to work. The battery's the same, the radio's the same. The problem with Baofeng is they've got so many form factors that it's hard to guess at what's going to fit in a particular charger. As I remember, I've forgotten who it was, whether it was Radiodity or maybe BuyTwoWayRadios.com had a GMRS package that included several radios and a gang charger. So they're out there, but you may have to look around a little bit.
Okay. And Dave New brought up something. He said, it says publicly switched networks or other networks are not allowed except for remote control purposes.
Right. That's that POTS, public networks. Internet is not considered a public network, I don't believe, in terms of this.
Okay. And that's everything in chat, Dan.
Okay, Gene, you've been patiently waiting with your hand up. Go ahead and take it.
Yes, maybe my last question. Is GMRS strictly US based, or can it be used in other countries based upon their radio spectrum licenses or allowances?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Basically, GMRS is a US service with the restrictions placed on by the FCC. That's part of the reason why the A line is up there, because in Canada, the frequencies used on like GMRS 19 or 20, they use them in Canada for something entirely different. And so GMRS radios aren't really used anywhere else because it's basically a personal radio service under the auspices of the FCC. Now, you may find, PMR in Great Britain and some of these other radio services that serve the same function, but they're in different frequencies and have different kinds of radios.
I see. Thank you very much. I was wondering about that, looking at like the border between the United States and Canada or the United States and Mexico. The crossover of frequencies, a border doesn't stop frequencies. I'm just wondering if the other countries allowed that service also. Thank you.
Okay, Carlos, you got your hand up, sir.
Yes, regarding the PMR 446 service in Europe, especially England and other countries, I always take note on that because actually PMR 446 in the United Kingdom is inside the US 446 band. So if you purchase a PMR 446 radio and you use it in the US, you are violating the FCC because you need a ham license to operate in 446 in the United States. So people have to be careful not to purchase the wrong radio for use in US and its territories.
No, that's very true. And you often see, like with Yaesu radios, for example, I've got a FTD 500, and in some of the groups I belong to there, the guy's going, I can't get it to get out of this range. Well, he bought it in Japan, and it's hard programmed to the JAL. kind of frequencies. And so you're right. You do have to be careful, especially with some of those international vendors like AliExpress and so forth.
Okay, Barry, I saw a couple more comments come up. Is there anything more in the comments?
Okay, Brad wants to know, how do we ID the station when the license is shared with the family?
It can be as complicated or simple as you want. They want to know who the licensee is. Most people just all use the same license. Some people might say, -4 or -2, but that's not required. Really, the only thing is to announce the call sign, and nothing special about which family member. There's no need to be that specific.
Okay. Are GMRS users limited by the same A-line as ham radio users because there's different power authorized by the different radios? Or
I think so. I think the line is the same. Then there's the sea line down the east border of Alaska. And so I think those restrictions are the same.
okay, that's everything in chat.
Okay. Anybody else got any questions, comments? This has really been good, and I like your setup there, Jim. Jim, I'm having a hard time with names tonight. I'm Dan, by the way. At any rate, you've got a very high quality setup there. That's great.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I do my YouTube videos here, and I usually feed an HDMI output from a Sony Handycam. And tonight I have it just going into my PC, and that camera is identified in the Windows settings. And then I have a Maono microphone, a USB microphone that I've also got plugged in to the USB of my my computer. And so I was hoping that it would work and that it would be good quality. So thank you for pointing that out for me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you sound really great. You look great. Before I forget, would you please send me your slides for this presentation when we get done, so I can put it out there with your presentation?
Absolutely. I've got it all printed up, and so I'll just drop it in an email to you.
Okay, sounds good.
He
Okay.
wants to know how many handy talkies you have behind you.
I think there's about 22, because I've got about 4 more of them over on my desk that I've been working on, doing some reviews on. And so a bunch of these I've purchased. Some of them I've gotten from vendors to do reviews for. And they're a blend of GMRS and ham HTs both.
Okay.
Okay.
Any more comments or questions? Well, Peter's got his hand up. Go for it, Peter.
Hey, good evening, Dan, and hello, Jim. I just wanted to mention that our Aries group here in Nevada County, Nevada City, Grass Valley area, we have a program that we provide information for our neighborhood watch groups and how to use radio. And we base this on GMRS. And we also have a local repeater in the area. And it's a very big problem in our area because we have a lot of mountainous terrain and a lot of wildfire danger. So it's been a very successful program. Right now, we have over 150 households that are in the program. Each household has a radio, and the neighborhoods basically run their own nets during the week to sort of keep their people in practice, as it were. So just another use for GMRS. And in addition, our Aries group, we also have GMRS, and we have GMRS in our Emergency Operations Center so that we can tie into the neighborhoods during an emergency. So it's a combined system. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah,
Jim.
that's very cool. When you can not be tribal about what it is you're doing, you can do some really cool stuff.
Yeah, I shared some information on that program that, Peter, that program was based on the RRI Neighborhood Radio Watch program. So I shared a link on the chat, to our webpage with some information on Neighborhood Ham Watch, Neighborhood Radio Watch, as well as a link to a video if anybody's interested in that. But the idea was that, you use GMRS as a force multiplier, to local community organizations, volunteer organizations active in disaster response. Their intra-communications is on GMRS and interoperable FRS, and the amateur radio services provide the training and the gateway to local emergency management, emergency services, national infrastructure and the like. So if anybody's curious about, the model for that, I shared some information on it.
Everybody will get that if they download the presentation. That is included.
Okay, well, thanks. That was James Wade who came on. He is one of the leaders of the pack of the RRI folks, and he'll be giving a presentation on the RATPAC here very soon. He's given it in the past, and they've been doing lots of great things. Anything more about this presentation out there? Questions, answers?
Excellent job, Jim.
Yes,
Thank
it has
you.
been a great job.
Appreciate it.
Okay, with that in mind,
Hands up, Dan.
okay, so he's asking how to download the presentation. When we put these things out on YouTube and we put them out on other things, we always have a link to where you can download the presentation on there. So any way you look at that, that's where it's going to be. Okay, with that in mind, folks.
Dan had his hand up.
Say again, Barry.
Dan, the other Dan has his hand up. Or he's waving, probably can't click on the hand, but he's waving his hand. He has a question.
Oh, okay. Well, Dan, the other Dan.
Yeah, I've been outsmarted by Zoom, and a recent update took away my reactions button. So I'm going to have to eat some crow and talk to them or read their documentation to get it back. Anyhow,
it's easy.
Jim,
just click on your react button on the bottom, and it gives you all the stuff you're asking for.
oh no, not on my react button.
Check the little more dots.
Oh wait, right at the bottom of it. Yeah, okay.
Yay!
All right. Well, thank you. That's not what I wanted to say, though. Jim, this was a really well organized and sort of answer. I've been thinking about GMRS for about 4 or 5 years, and this was the cleanest presentation I've seen about it. So, just kudos for how you present it. And there's long ago, it's irrelevant, but at one point I was asked by somebody I owed a lot of favors to find out if GMRS could do digital. And 4 years ago, 5 years ago, the answer was yes, but I can't figure out how to do it back then. And I'm not sure it would have been appropriate because it was somebody who had a trucking business and wanted to use it for that purpose. So I still don't know the answer, and I don't really care. But GMRS for neighborhood communications is definitely something that fits in with our presumed desire to provide support for community events and times of danger. I'm glad to see this stuff cropping up all over the place. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. You got a comment there for him, Jim?
No, I appreciate the comments, and you're right. Neighborhood watches, community service, just as with ham clubs that sometimes, kind of focus in that. There are GMRS clubs forming around the country that do exactly the same thing.
Oh, Everett, over there, Everett. Go ahead.
Is that Victor here?
Yes. I'm
Okay.
having a hard time with names tonight.
Question on repeaters. I assume that they are limited by the FCC to the same as any other repeater on a tower that is 200 foot, 500 foot, whatever, or the special limitations on GMRS? And the second half of the question is, are we using the same kind of coax for the radios, or are we in a new generation of coax and signal loss and everything else down the wire? Thank you very much. Have a great week.
Yeah, again, the second question first, and that is, those radios are essentially ham radios. So however you would do it with a ham radio, you can do it with a GMRS radio. They're just a few, megahertz above the 70 centimeter band. And then in terms of towers, I think it's MERS maybe that has a 60-foot tower limitation. But in terms of GMRS, the only limitation is limitations to air navigation. So whatever the rules are for the FAA.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Any more questions or comments out there? Did a great presentation, Jim. Thanks again. Okay, with that in mind, we went a little over, but that's okay. We do that for these good presentations. 73s, everybody. We got another one tomorrow night. Want to join us and have a good evening. This is
Night all.
73s.